The mansion glittered with opulence, a spectacle of wealth and power brought to life under the starlit sky of New Year's Eve. Every detail of the celebration screamed excess, from the crystalline champagne flutes to the gilded staircases adorned with cascades of white roses. Lara hesitated at the threshold, clutching the modest clutch she borrowed from her best friend, Julia. It was a world foreign to her, a world of unimaginable money and boundless confidence, where the guests moved as though the rules of gravity bent for them. She adjusted the hem of her simple black dress, one she had spent her last paycheck on, and stepped inside. Her nerves prickled with the sensation of being out of place, amplified by the cutting glances cast her way. She wasn't blind to the whispers or the fleeting smirks exchanged behind crystal glasses. The room felt heavy with an unspoken judgment, and her presence seemed to jar the carefully curated perfection of the elite. The laughter of a nearby group sliced through the tension. Among them was Isabella, a socialite whose presence dominated the room as effortlessly as her diamond-encrusted gown caught the light. Isabella's voice rang loud, dripping with mockery. "Who let the charity case in?" she quipped, not bothering to lower her tone. The circle around her erupted in cruel laughter. Lara froze. Heat flushed her cheeks and a lump formed in her throat. She glanced at Julia, who was deep in conversation with a client, oblivious to the scene. Gathering her courage, Lara ignored the sting and drifted toward a quieter corner. She knew she shouldn't have come. This wasn't her world. She had no business here. Every dollar in her pocket seemed inadequate in a place where money was less a necessity and more a weapon. As she tried to steady her breathing, her eyes caught someone watching her from across the room. He wasn't laughing. In fact, his expression was unreadable, a mix of curiosity and something deeper she couldn't place. His tailored suit fit him like a second skin, but it was his eyes that held her captive, sharp and probing. She quickly looked away, unsure whether his attention was a blessing or a curse. The weight of the evening bore down on her, and she decided she had endured enough. Excusing herself quietly, she made her way toward the exit, her steps quickening with every heartbeat. But as she reached the door, a voice stopped her. "You don't belong here," Isabella sneered, blocking her path. "But I suppose that was obvious the moment you walked in." Lara felt her throat tighten. The words she wanted to hurl back at Isabella stuck somewhere between her pride and her fear. She could feel the stares of others boring into her back, waiting for her to break. For a moment she thought about standing her ground, but instead she brushed past Isabella without a word, her heart pounding with anger and humiliation. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around her like a solace she hadn't known she needed. As she leaned against the stone balustrade, a tear slipped down her cheek. She felt the weight of her dreams, dreams that seemed so far removed from the kind of life money could buy, crumble under the pressure of the night. But as she wiped her face and took a deep breath, the sound of footsteps behind her made her freeze. "I saw what happened," a calm, low voice said. Turning, Lara found herself face to face with the man who had been watching her earlier. His presence was commanding, yet his expression carried a softness that contrasted sharply with the arrogance of the other guests. "Don't let them win," he said simply, his tone steady and reassuring. Lara opened her mouth to respond, but before she could form a word, the man reached into his pocket and handed her a card. "Call me," he said, his gaze locking with hers. "I'd like to help." She stared at the card in her hand as he walked away without waiting for a response. The embossed letters spelled out his name, Gabriel Moretti, followed by a number. Lara looked up, but he was already gone, disappearing into the sea of silk gowns and tailored suits. Her fingers tightened around the card as a flicker of determination ignited within her. For the first time that evening, she felt something other than shame, something akin to hope. Little did she know that fleeting interaction was about to change everything. The new year arrived with a quiet resolve in Lara's heart. She placed Gabriel Moretti's card on her modest desk and stared at it for days, debating whether to make the call. Each time her gaze lingered, doubts crept in. Why would a man like him, a figure clearly steeped in the world of wealth and privilege, want to help her? Was he simply pitying her, or was there something more? Despite her apprehensions, her curiosity began to outweigh her hesitation. Her days passed in the monotony of her job as a part-time cashier at a local grocery store. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept her afloat, allowing her to save a little for the dream she had nursed quietly for years, opening an art school for children from underprivileged backgrounds. Lara often sketched plans for it during her breaks, her imagination painting walls lined with vibrant murals and classrooms filled with laughter and color. But dreams like that required money. Money she didn't have and couldn't imagine earning anytime soon. One evening, while counting the cash in her till, her mind wandered back to Gabriel. What did he mean by wanting to help? And why did his gaze linger on her that night, as though he saw through the humiliations of the party to something she didn't even recognize in herself? She shook the thought away and focused on finishing her shift, yet the card weighed heavily in her pocket. Finally, on a night when the city lights glimmered faintly against a winter drizzle, she made the call. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number. Each ring felt like an eternity until his voice answered, smooth and steady, cutting through her nerves. "Gabriel Moretti speaking." Lara hesitated. "It's Lara from the New Year's party." A pause. "I was hoping you'd call," he said, his tone betraying neither surprise nor impatience. "Can we meet?" His directness startled her, but she found herself agreeing. A part of her wanted answers, while another part clung to the possibility that this could lead to something meaningful. She needed an escape from the invisible shackles of her circumstances, from the financial limitations that suffocated her dreams and kept her tethered to the mundanity of her life. The following afternoon, Lara arrived at a sleek cafe nestled in one of the city's more affluent districts. Its polished marble floors and soft amber lighting made her feel out of place, but she forced herself to walk in with her head high. Gabriel was already seated at a corner table, his posture casual yet commanding, as though the weight of the world bowed to him. "Lara," he greeted her warmly, rising as she approached. His genuine smile disarmed her, easing some of her tension. "Thank you for coming." She sat across from him, clasping her hands tightly on her lap. "Why me?" she asked bluntly, skipping any pleasantries. "Why did you say you wanted to help?" Gabriel's gaze softened, and for a moment it seemed as though he was weighing his words carefully. "Because I saw something in you that night. Something the others were too blind to notice. You didn't let their ridicule break you. You walked away with your dignity intact. That takes strength." Lara blinked, unsure how to respond. "But why does that matter to you?" Gabriel leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Because strength like that deserves to be nurtured, not crushed. I've spent my life in a world where money and power dictate everything. But it's rare to meet someone who refuses to be defined by it. You remind me of someone I once knew, someone who mattered." The cryptic remark left her curious but wary. "What are you offering?" she asked cautiously. He smiled faintly. "An opportunity. You mentioned to Julia once that you wanted to start an art school. I want to help you make that happen." Lara stared at him, her mind racing. The idea sounded absurd, too good to be true. "You don't even know me," she said skeptically. "I know enough," he countered. "Enough to see potential. But let me be clear, this isn't charity. Think of it as an investment in someone I believe in. You'll have to work for it, and you'll owe me results. Are you willing to take that chance?" The weight of his words sank in. She thought of the countless children who could benefit from a space where they could express themselves freely, where finances wouldn't be a barrier to creativity. The idea filled her with both fear and exhilaration. This wasn't just about her dreams, it was about something larger. "Why would you do this?" she asked again, her voice tinged with suspicion. "What's in it for you?" Gabriel leaned back, a shadow crossing his face. "Let's just say I've made mistakes I'm trying to atone for. Helping someone build something meaningful is my way of making peace with the past." The conversation left her with more questions than answers, but Gabriel's sincerity was difficult to ignore. After an hour of discussions about logistics, funding, and the school's vision, Lara walked out of the cafe with a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. She clutched the folder Gabriel had given her, filled with preliminary financial outlines and a rough timeline for launching the project. As she stepped onto the bustling street, her thoughts swirled with a mixture of hope and doubt. Could she trust him? And more importantly, could she trust herself to rise to the challenge? She couldn't shake the feeling that Gabriel's offer was more than a simple gesture of goodwill. It felt like a thread connecting their fates in ways she didn't yet understand. The crisp air carried the faint aroma of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor as Lara hurried along the crowded sidewalk. Gabriel's folder felt heavy in her hands, as though the papers inside carried not just the weight of her dreams, but the uncertainty of trusting a man she barely knew. Every page she'd read since their meeting painted a meticulous picture of the opportunity he was offering, an initial fund large enough to launch the art school and sustain it for a year. But the conditions were clear. She would be responsible for running it, and there would be no second chances if she failed. Inside her tiny apartment, she spread the documents across the table. The financial outlines were precise, broken down to the smallest detail. Gabriel hadn't left anything to chance. Salaries for instructors, rental costs for a space in a lower-income neighborhood, and even marketing plans. Everything had been considered. The numbers, however, were staggering. She had never seen so much money allocated to anything, let alone a project tied to her name. That night she barely slept. The idea of finally bringing her vision to life was intoxicating, but her thoughts kept circling back to Gabriel. His generosity seemed genuine, yet there was an air of restraint about him, as though he was guarding secrets too painful to share. She couldn't help but wonder if his motivations were tied to guilt rather than altruism. And then there was the gnawing question, what if she failed? The next morning, Lara found herself walking toward a dilapidated warehouse that Gabriel had suggested as a potential location for the school. Its exterior was weathered, with graffiti scrawled across its faded brick walls, but the space inside had potential. As she stepped into the cavernous room, the light streaming through broken windows created a kaleidoscope of shadows on the floor. Her heart raced as she imagined it transformed, walls bursting with color, children's laughter echoing through the halls. Her reverie was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Turning, she saw Gabriel standing at the entrance, his hands in his pockets. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice cutting through the stillness. "It's perfect," she replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her tone, "but it's also a lot to take on." Gabriel nodded, stepping further inside. "Every dream worth chasing feels that way at first, but I wouldn't have offered if I didn't think you were capable." "Why me, though?" she asked, unable to keep the question bottled up any longer. "You could fund anyone with better credentials or experience. Why take a chance on someone like me?" He hesitated, his gaze falling to the dusty floor before meeting hers. "Because sometimes the people who face the most challenges are the ones who create the most meaningful change. You know what it's like to fight for what little you have. That kind of resilience can't be taught." Lara felt the weight of his words settle over her. She wanted to believe him, but a part of her still doubted her own worth. "I just don't want to disappoint you, or myself." "You won't," he said firmly. But if you ever feel like you're losing your way, remember why you started. This isn't just about money or success. It's about creating something that outlasts both. His words lingered in her mind as they walked through the space, discussing potential layouts and timelines. Gabriel's knowledge surprised her. He seemed to anticipate every question she hadn't yet thought to ask. But the more they talked, the more she noticed subtle cracks in his polished demeanor. There were moments when his voice would falter, or his gaze would drift, as though haunted by something only he could see. Later that evening, as she returned home, Lara couldn't shake the feeling that Gabriel's past held more than he was letting on. His confidence seemed to mask a vulnerability that intrigued her as much as it unsettled her. And yet, his belief in her felt like a lifeline, something she hadn't realized she needed until now. She spent the next week diving into the details of the project, working late into the night to refine the plans. Gabriel had arranged for her to meet with potential instructors and a property manager to finalize the lease on the warehouse. Each step felt like a leap closer to a life she had only dared to imagine, but with every step forward, the stakes grew higher, and so did her doubts. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Lara sat at her kitchen table, staring at a spreadsheet on her laptop. The numbers blurred before her eyes, and she leaned back with a frustrated sigh. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen to see a text from Gabriel. "How are things progressing?" She hesitated before replying, "It's overwhelming, but I'm managing." A few seconds later, his response appeared. "Good. Overwhelming means you're doing something that matters." Lara stared at the message, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Despite her reservations about him, his encouragement had a way of grounding her. But even as she typed a polite reply, a thought struck her. Why did he care so much? What drove him to invest not just his money, but his time and energy into her dream? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as she closed her laptop and prepared for bed. As sleep finally claimed her, Lara couldn't help but feel that her partnership with Gabriel was about more than just business. There was an undercurrent to their connection, a sense that their lives were intertwining in ways neither of them fully understood. The days turned into weeks, and the dream that once felt intangible began to take shape. The dusty warehouse was cleaned, the walls painted in vibrant hues, and the echoes of its desolation replaced by the hum of possibility. Lara worked tirelessly, managing everything from sourcing supplies to interviewing instructors. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, but for the first time in her life, it felt purposeful. Yet, as the project progressed, so did Lara's doubts. Late at night, alone in her apartment, she would stare at the growing list of expenses and logistical hurdles. Gabriel's initial investment had been generous, but the reality of managing finances consumed her thoughts. The constant fear of failure gnawed at her, a relentless reminder that this opportunity could slip through her fingers if she faltered. It didn't help that whispers about her connection to Gabriel had started to circulate. At first, it was subtle, offhand remarks from potential partners questioning her credentials. Then came the pointed comments from those who seemed intent on reducing her to a stereotype, the small-town girl who had luckily caught the eye of a wealthy benefactor. She tried to brush it off, but the judgment stung, amplifying her insecurities. One afternoon, as she reviewed the budget with a hired accountant, her phone buzzed with a call from Julia. Lara answered, grateful for the distraction. "You're becoming quite the celebrity," Julia teased, though her tone carried an edge. "What do you mean?" Lara asked, her stomach tightening. "There's been some talk," Julia said carefully. "People are curious about why Gabriel is so invested in you. A few are saying it's personal." The implication hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Lara felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. "It's not like that," she said defensively. He's helping because he believes in the project. I know that, Julia replied quickly. But you know how people are. They can't see a woman succeed without assuming there's a man pulling the strings. Lara ended the call feeling raw, her confidence shaken. The gossip chipped away at the pride she felt in her work, reducing her achievements to someone else's charity. She couldn't let it derail her, but the comments clung to her thoughts like a persistent shadow. That evening, Gabriel stopped by the warehouse unexpectedly. Lara was on her knees, scrubbing paint off the floor, when he entered, his presence filling the room. He knelt beside her, offering a cloth. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "What's going on?" She hesitated, unsure whether to confide in him, but the weight of her emotions pressed against her, and the words spilled out before she could stop them. "People are saying I'm only here because of you, that this isn't my success. It's yours." Gabriel leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Do you believe that?" "No," she said quickly. Then, quieter, "But it's hard not to wonder if they're right. I mean, this was your money, your idea to make it happen." "It was your dream," he corrected firmly. "All I did was give it a chance to breathe. You're the one making it real." Lara looked at him, searching his face for any hint of condescension, but found none. His sincerity disarmed her, as it always did. Still, a question lingered at the edge of her mind, one she'd avoided asking until now. "Why are you doing this, Gabriel? Really?" For a moment, he seemed to retreat into himself, his gaze distant. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when people with money use it to tear others down instead of building something worthwhile. I don't want to be like them." His words resonated with her, but they also deepened her curiosity. Gabriel's past was an enigma, and every answer he gave seemed to hint at deeper wounds he refused to reveal. Lara wanted to press him further, but his expression made it clear the conversation was over. The following days brought a renewed focus to the project. Lara threw herself into the work, determined to prove her critics wrong. She began hosting free workshops in the space, inviting local children to explore painting, sculpture, and storytelling. The laughter of the kids filled the once empty warehouse, and for the first time in weeks, Lara felt a sense of fulfillment that outweighed her doubts. But even as the school began to take form, the whispers persisted. During one of the workshops, Isabella appeared, her presence as sharp and unwelcome as a blade. Dressed impeccably in a designer coat, she surveyed the space with a smirk. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Look at you, playing philanthropist." Lara stiffened, her hands tightening into fists. "I'm busy, Isabella. What do you want?" "I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about," Isabella said, strolling through the room as though she owned it. Her gaze landed on a group of children painting at a table. Cute. "But let's be honest, this is Gabriel's project, isn't it? You're just the face he's using to make it look authentic." Lara's chest tightened with fury, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You can think whatever you want," she said evenly, "but this school is happening with or without your approval." Isabella laughed, the sound cold and dismissive. "Good luck with that," she said, turning on her heel and leaving. As the door closed behind her, Lara felt a surge of determination. Isabella's words had struck a nerve, but they also reminded her of why she started this journey in the first place. She wasn't doing this for approval or recognition. She was doing it for the children who deserved a chance to create, to dream, and to escape the constraints of their circumstances. That night, as she stood in the empty warehouse, Lara allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead felt daunting, but for the first time, she saw herself not as an imposter, but as someone capable of shaping her own destiny, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. The warehouse buzzed with life. Paintbrushes scraped against canvases, laughter echoed off the newly painted walls, and the scent of fresh coffee wafted from a corner where a parent volunteer had set up a refreshment station. Lara stood at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, directing the flow of activities. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't dared to claim before: pride. But the sense of accomplishment was fleeting. The whispers had grown louder, and the rumors surrounding her partnership with Gabriel had taken on a life of their own. What had started as idle gossip had escalated into outright sabotage. An anonymous post on a local social media page accused Lara of using Gabriel's wealth for personal gain, even suggesting that their partnership was nothing more than a calculated relationship to secure financial stability. Lara's stomach churned as she read the comments that followed. Strangers dissected her character, labeling her as manipulative, untrustworthy, and undeserving of her newfound success. The sting of the accusations cut deep, but what shook her most was the realization that someone was intentionally trying to destroy what she had worked so hard to build. She called Gabriel that evening, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Someone's trying to sabotage the school," she said. "They're saying awful things online, and people are starting to believe them." Gabriel's voice was calm, but edged with steel. "Whoever's behind this doesn't care about the truth. They want to discredit you because they're threatened by what you're accomplishing." "But why?" Lara asked, pacing her small living room. "Why go to such lengths to tear me down?" Gabriel paused. "Because success, especially when it comes from someone unexpected, makes people uncomfortable. It disrupts the balance they've built their lives around." The words struck a chord with Lara, but they didn't ease her frustration. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We keep going," Gabriel said firmly. "Let them talk. Your work will speak louder than any rumor ever could." Despite his reassurance, Lara couldn't shake the unease that settled over her in the days that followed. The online attacks continued, each one more venomous than the last. Donors began to pull out, citing the controversy as a risk they weren't willing to take. The financial stability of the school wavered, and for the first time since its inception, Lara felt the ground beneath her start to crumble. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Isabella reappeared. She arrived unannounced, her presence as disruptive as a storm. Lara was in the middle of a meeting with the instructors when Isabella sauntered in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The instructors fell silent, their eyes darting between the two women as tension filled the room. "Lara," Isabella said, her tone dripping with faux concern. "I heard about the trouble you're having. Such a shame, really. But I suppose this was bound to happen." Lara's jaw tightened, but she refused to give Isabella the satisfaction of a reaction. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Isabella's smile widened. "Oh, I just wanted to offer my help. You see, I know a few people who could smooth things over for you. For the right price, of course." Lara's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly would that price be?" Isabella leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Step aside. Let someone with real influence take over. You can still have a role, of course, a smaller one. But this project? It's bigger than you, Lara. It needs someone who knows how to navigate these circles." The words hung in the air, a calculated insult wrapped in false kindness. Lara's hands clenched at her sides as anger surged through her. "Get out," she said, her voice low and firm. Isabella blinked, caught off guard by Lara's resolve. "Excuse me? You heard me," Lara said, her voice rising. "This school isn't for people like you. It's for the kids who need a chance, for the families who can't afford what your circles take for granted. I won't let you or anyone else turn this into something it was never meant to be." For a moment, Isabella looked as though she might argue, but then she simply smirked. "Suit yourself," she said, turning on her heel, "but don't say I didn't warn you." As the door slammed shut behind her, Lara felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her. The room was silent, the instructors watching her with a mix of admiration and concern. She forced a smile, assuring them that everything was under control, but deep down, she knew the battle was far from over. That night, as she sat in the quiet of her apartment, Lara allowed herself to reflect on Gabriel's words. Success was a disruption, a challenge to the status quo, but it was also a responsibility, one she had to carry, no matter how heavy it became. She wasn't just fighting for her dream, she was fighting for the kids whose lives could be transformed by it. And yet, a lingering question gnawed at her: who was behind the online attacks? The posts were too specific, too targeted to be random. Someone wanted to see her fail, and they were willing to go to great lengths to ensure it happened. As she drifted off to sleep, the thought followed her into her dreams, weaving itself into the shadows of her mind. Somewhere, someone was watching, waiting for her to stumble. But Lara wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. The air was heavy with the scent of rain as Lara walked into the warehouse early the next morning. The vibrant murals on the walls, which once filled her with pride, now seemed like a fragile dream under constant threat. Despite the children's growing enthusiasm and the community's tentative support, the school teetered on a precarious edge. The sabotage, the dwindling donations, and the ever-present whispers of scandal weighed heavily on her shoulders. Lara couldn't stop replaying Isabella's visit in her mind, the smugness in her voice, the veiled insults. None of it felt random. Isabella's disdain for her was obvious, but this felt personal, calculated. Lara had spent enough time observing the world of wealth and privilege from the sidelines to understand that money wasn't just power. It was a weapon, and someone was wielding it against her. Later that day, Gabriel arrived unexpectedly, his tailored coat damp from the drizzle outside. He strode into the main hall, where Lara was sorting through art supplies, his usual calm demeanor replaced with something sharper, concern, maybe even frustration. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Lara straightened, her pulse quickening. "What's wrong?" Gabriel glanced around, ensuring they were alone before speaking. "I've been looking into the source of the attacks, the posts, the rumors, the pulled donations. It's all connected, and I think I know who's behind it." Lara's chest tightened. "Who?" He hesitated, his jaw clenching before he finally said, "My father's former business partner, Victor Andrade." The name was unfamiliar to Lara, but the gravity in Gabriel's voice made her stomach sink. Why would he care about this school? Gabriel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Victor has a vendetta against my family. When my father's empire collapsed, Victor was one of the many casualties. He lost everything: money, status, his reputation. He blames my father for his downfall, and by extension, he blames me. For years, he's been waiting for a chance to strike back. Your school is just collateral damage." Lara stared at him, trying to process the revelation. "So this isn't about me at all," she said bitterly. "It's about you." Gabriel's expression darkened. "No, it's about us. Victor knows how much this project means to me and to you. He wants to destroy it because he knows it's something good, something that represents everything my father's legacy wasn't." The weight of his words settled over her like a storm cloud. Lara had suspected Gabriel was carrying secrets, but this revelation was more than she had anticipated. It wasn't just her dream at stake. It was a battle against forces far larger and more powerful than she'd ever imagined. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside her. Gabriel stepped closer, his gaze intense. "We fight back, but we have to be smart about it. I've already started reaching out to people who can help. Lawyers, PR experts. We'll expose Victor for what he's doing and make it impossible for him to keep attacking us." Lara nodded, though a knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach. The idea of going head-to-head with someone like Victor Andrade felt daunting, almost impossible. But as she looked at Gabriel, she saw something she hadn't noticed before: vulnerability. For all his confidence and resources, he was just as affected by this as she was. In the days that followed, the battle against Victor began in earnest. Gabriel's team worked tirelessly to uncover the sources of the online attacks, tracing them back to shell accounts funded by companies linked to Victor. Meanwhile, Lara focused on keeping the school running, pouring her energy into the workshops and outreach programs that had become the heart of the project. But the tension was palpable. Each day brought new challenges, another rumor to squash, another donor to convince. Lara found herself questioning whether it was worth it, whether her dream could withstand the relentless onslaught. Her late-night conversations with Gabriel became a lifeline, a place where she could voice her fears without judgment. One evening, as they spoke on the phone, Lara finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "Why do you care so much about this school, about me?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Gabriel replied, "Because you remind me of the person I used to be. Before my father's mistakes, before all the money and power corrupted everything, I had dreams too. Helping you is my way of trying to reclaim that part of myself." His admission left her speechless. For all his composure and strength, Gabriel was fighting his own battles, wrestling with the shadows of his past. It made her see him in a new light, not just as a benefactor, but as someone deeply flawed and deeply human. As their fight against Victor intensified, Lara began to notice subtle changes in Gabriel. His usually calm exterior cracked under the pressure, revealing flashes of anger and frustration. It became clear that this wasn't just about the school. It was about his need to prove something, to Victor, to himself, and perhaps even to Lara. One afternoon, as they reviewed the latest developments in their case against Victor, Gabriel turned to her with a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "This isn't just a fight for the school, Lara. It's a fight for everything I've tried to build since walking away from my father's empire. If we lose, it won't just hurt you, it'll destroy me." Lara met his gaze, the weight of his words sinking in. "We won't lose," she said, her voice firm. "Because this isn't just about you or me. It's about the kids, the families, the community. And that's something Victor will never understand." In that moment, a quiet resolve passed between them. They were in this together, bound by a shared determination to protect what they had created. But as the days turned into nights and the pressure mounted, Lara couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was far from over, and that the worst was yet to come. The whispers of war between Gabriel and Victor Andrade grew louder, bleeding into every corner of Lara's life. The school had become a battleground, not just of ideals, but of survival. The once vibrant warehouse now carried an edge of tension, its bright murals a stark contrast to the anxiety gnawing at Lara's resolve. She worked tirelessly, masking her fears with determination, but the weight of Victor's influence loomed over everything. One evening, as Lara prepared to lock up after a long day, she noticed a sleek black car idling across the street. Her pulse quickened. The car had been there the day before, and something about its presence felt ominous. She glanced around, but the street was otherwise quiet. Shaking off her unease, she turned the lock and hurried home, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the stillness. Gabriel's warnings played on a loop in her mind. Victor wasn't the kind of man who fought fair. His wealth and connections made him nearly untouchable, and his tactics were designed to break people in ways that left no visible scars. Lara had tried to prepare herself for the battles she could see: donor withdrawals, social media smears, and local gossip. But this was different. This was personal. The next morning, Lara arrived at the school to find the main entrance vandalized. Spray painted across the door were the words "fraud" and "gold digger." The sight made her stomach churn. In the span of a few hours, news of the vandalism had spread through the community. Parents called to ask if the school would be safe, while volunteers hesitated to show up. The sense of progress she had worked so hard to build began to unravel. Gabriel was at the warehouse within the hour, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage. "It's Victor," he said, his voice clipped. "He's escalating." Lara felt a wave of anger rise in her. Why? What does he even gain from this? It's a school, not some corporate empire. "For people like Victor, it's not about gain," Gabriel replied. "It's about control. He sees you as a pawn in a game he's been playing for years, and he knows the easiest way to hurt me is through you." The words left a bitter taste in Lara's mouth. She hated the idea of being used as leverage in a feud that had nothing to do with her, but more than that, she hated the thought of giving Victor the satisfaction of watching her crumble. "We need to fight back," she said, her voice steady. "But not just against Victor. We need to show the community that this school is stronger than any of his games." Gabriel nodded, his gaze softening. "What are you thinking?" "An open house," she said. "Invite everyone, parents, kids, donors, even the press. Let them see what we're doing here. Let them see the impact this school is already having. If we show them the truth, Victor's lies won't stand a chance." Gabriel hesitated, then smiled. "You've got more fight in you than most people I know." The open house was scheduled for the following week, leaving Lara and her team with little time to prepare. They worked tirelessly, transforming the warehouse into a showcase of creativity and community. Every detail mattered. Displays of student artwork, live performances, and testimonials from parents whose children had already begun to thrive in the program. The school buzzed with energy, its walls coming alive with the stories of those it had touched. As the event drew closer, Lara couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. She knew this was a gamble. If the open house failed, it could solidify Victor's narrative and drive away what little support the school still had. But as she watched the children rehearse their performances, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't about her or even Gabriel. It was about them, the kids who had found a haven in the chaos of their lives. The night before the open house, Lara received a call from Gabriel. His tone was quieter than usual, tinged with an unease she hadn't heard before. "There's something you should know," he said. "What is it?" she asked, her heart sinking. "Victor's not working alone," Gabriel admitted. "He's enlisted Isabella." Lara's grip on the phone tightened. "Of course he has. She's been trying to tear me down since the day I walked into that party. She's feeding him information about the school," Gabriel continued, "and she's been leveraging her connections to turn potential donors against us." Lara felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "I didn't want to distract you," Gabriel said, "but you needed to know before tomorrow. Isabella's likely planning something, and we have to be ready." Lara hung up, feeling a mix of anger and determination. Isabella's involvement didn't surprise her, but it fueled her resolve to prove them both wrong. She spent the rest of the night fine-tuning every detail of the open house, determined to make it a success. The next day, the warehouse was filled with a crowd larger than Lara had anticipated. Parents, children, local reporters, and even a few hesitant donors milled about, their curiosity evident. Lara moved through the crowd, answering questions and guiding visitors, her nervous energy hidden beneath a practiced smile. As the evening wore on, the mood began to shift. The performances were a hit, and the testimonials brought more than a few audience members to tears. Lara felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were turning the tide. But as she stepped backstage to check on the next group of performers, her phone buzzed with a notification. Opening it, she froze. An anonymous post on social media had just gone live, accusing the school of financial mismanagement and suggesting that Lara was embezzling funds. The timing was deliberate. Victor's shadow loomed large, and Isabella's fingerprints were all over the message. Lara's chest tightened as she stared at the screen, but before she could react, Gabriel appeared beside her. "We expected this," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Don't let it rattle you. Focus on the people in that room. They're the ones who matter." Lara took a deep breath and nodded. She wasn't going to let Victor or Isabella win. Not tonight. Not ever. The open house had been a success, but the air still felt heavy as Lara walked through the now empty warehouse. The faint scent of paint and the echo of applause lingered, but beneath her pride was a gnawing unease. The anonymous accusation of financial mismanagement had circulated widely, its timing deliberately undercutting the school's growing momentum. Despite Gabriel's reassurances, Lara knew that even a baseless claim could plant doubt in the minds of donors and parents alike. The next morning, Lara met with Gabriel at his office, a sleek, minimalist space that seemed to mirror his composed demeanor. He greeted her with a brief nod, but his usual warmth was tempered by the weight of the situation. "The good news," he began, "is that the open house left a strong impression. A few donors who had been on the fence are reconsidering their support." "And the bad news?" Lara asked, bracing herself. "The rumors are gaining traction," Gabriel admitted. "Victor is leveraging his connections to make the accusations stick. We've managed to contain most of it, but it's only a matter of time before it escalates further." Lara clenched her fists. Why does he care so much? Why put this much effort into destroying a school? "Because it's not just a school," Gabriel said quietly. "It's a symbol. Victor doesn't just want to ruin you or me. He wants to prove that people like us don't deserve second chances." Lara stared at him, her mind racing. For all his calm, Gabriel carried a burden that ran far deeper than he let on. His father's legacy, Victor's vendetta, the expectations of a world obsessed with money and power, it was all tied together, and she had been pulled into the storm. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "We fight smarter," Gabriel said. "I've already instructed my legal team to begin gathering evidence. Victor's tactics leave a trail, and we're going to expose him for what he's doing." Lara nodded, though a flicker of doubt lingered. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure was relentless. But as she left Gabriel's office, a thought struck her. She wasn't just reacting to Victor's attacks. She needed to take control of the narrative. Over the next few days, Lara worked tirelessly to craft a public response. She enlisted the help of a few trusted volunteers to create a video highlighting the school's impact on the community. It featured the children's artwork, candid moments from workshops, and heartfelt testimonials from parents. The final clip was a brief, vulnerable message from Lara herself. "We built this school to give kids a place where they can dream, create, and grow," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "No amount of money or power should ever stand in the way of that." The video was shared widely, gaining traction across social media and sparking a wave of support from the community. Donations began trickling back in, and parents who had been hesitant started reaching out again. For the first time in weeks, Lara felt a glimmer of hope. But Victor wasn't finished. 2 days later, Lara received a notice from the city council. An anonymous complaint had been filed, claiming the warehouse was in violation of zoning regulations. The school was ordered to halt all operations until the matter could be resolved. Lara's heart sank as she read the notice. This was a calculated move, designed to stall progress and sow further doubt. She called Gabriel immediately, her voice shaking with frustration. "He's trying to shut us down," she said. Gabriel's response was immediate. We'll fight this. My team will handle the legal side, but we need to mobilize the community. If enough people stand with us, the council will have to listen. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Lara organized rallies, met with local officials, and reached out to parents and teachers for their support. The community's response was overwhelming. Families showed up in droves, holding signs and sharing stories about the school's impact. The media caught wind of the controversy, and the story began to gain national attention. Despite the chaos, Lara found herself leaning on Gabriel more than ever. Their late-night phone calls had become a lifeline, a place where she could voice her fears and frustrations without judgment. One night, as they spoke, she asked him a question that had been weighing on her. "Do you ever regret walking away from your father's world?" Gabriel was silent for a moment before answering. "Sometimes. It would have been easier to stay, to play the game, and enjoy the privileges that came with it. But then I wouldn't have been able to live with myself." His honesty struck a chord with Lara. For all his wealth and influence, Gabriel was as much a product of his choices as she was. They were both fighting for something larger than themselves, and the connection between them felt stronger than ever. The turning point came during a city council hearing, where Lara and Gabriel presented their case alongside dozens of community members. Parents spoke passionately about the school's impact, while children held up drawings and paintings they had created in the workshops. The council members listened intently, their skepticism gradually replaced by admiration. In the end, the council voted unanimously to dismiss the complaint, allowing the school to resume its operations. The room erupted in applause, and Lara felt tears prick her eyes as relief washed over her. That night, as she stood in the empty warehouse, Lara allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The battle wasn't over, but they had won an important victory. The school's future was still uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of possibility, a belief that they could overcome whatever came next. But as she locked up and stepped into the cool night air, a shadowy figure emerged from the alley. Her breath caught as she recognized Victor Andrade, his presence commanding and menacing. "You've made quite the spectacle of yourself," he said, his voice low and cold. "But don't think for a second that this is over." Lara met his gaze, her fear tempered by a surge of defiance. "Neither is my fight," she said. Victor smirked, his expression unreadable, before disappearing into the darkness. As Lara walked away, her heart pounding, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had just begun. The warehouse brimmed with life again, but the tension in Lara's chest remained. The confrontation with Victor lingered in her mind, his parting words a chilling reminder that their fight was far from over. She tried to focus on the victories they had achieved, the community support, the dismissal of the zoning complaint, but the sense of foreboding refused to leave. Gabriel, too, seemed more on edge. His calm demeanor had begun to crack, revealing a man grappling with the weight of his decisions. They spoke less frequently as he immersed himself in legal battles and behind-the-scenes efforts to counter Victor's attacks. Lara missed his steady presence, but understood that his absence was part of the fight they were both waging. It was during one of those quiet evenings, when Lara was alone in the warehouse reviewing upcoming workshop plans, that her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number. Hesitating for a moment, she answered. "Lara speaking." The voice on the other end was hushed but urgent. "You need to leave the warehouse, now." Her heart raced. "Who is this?" "There's no time to explain," the voice said. "Victor isn't playing by the rules anymore." Before she could ask anything further, the line went dead. Panic surged through her as she grabbed her things and headed for the door. Stepping outside, she scanned the street, her breath catching at the sight of the same black car she'd seen weeks ago. It was parked just down the block, its windows dark and unyielding. For a moment, she considered walking the other way, but then the door to the car opened and Gabriel stepped out. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived as she noticed the tension in his expression. "Get in," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lara slid into the passenger seat, her hands trembling. "What's going on?" Gabriel pulled away from the curb, his grip on the steering wheel tight. "Victor's escalated his tactics. He's hired people to intimidate you. That call you got? It came from someone on my team monitoring his activities." Lara stared at him, her stomach knotting. "He's sending people after me now? Why?" "Because you're winning," Gabriel said simply. "And Victor doesn't handle losing well." The weight of his words settled over her as the car sped through the city. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," Gabriel replied. "Just for tonight. I need time to figure out how to neutralize this latest move." Lara nodded, though fear coursed through her veins. She had known Victor was ruthless, but this was a level of malice she hadn't anticipated. The idea that he would target her directly, using threats and intimidation, made her feel both vulnerable and furious. Gabriel took her to a private residence on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling estate tucked away behind tall gates and dense trees. As they entered, Lara felt a mix of awe and unease. The house was beautiful but cold, its grandeur a stark contrast to the warmth she associated with home. "You'll be safe here," Gabriel said, leading her to a cozy sitting room with a fireplace already lit. "I have security monitoring the property." Lara sank into a chair, the events of the evening catching up with her. "This isn't what I signed up for," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I wanted to build something good, not get caught in the crossfire of someone else's feud." Gabriel knelt in front of her, his expression earnest. "This isn't your fault. None of it. Victor's actions are on him, not you. But if you want out, I'll understand." Lara looked at him, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I can't walk away. Not now. If I give up, he wins. And I'm not going to let that happen." Gabriel smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "You're stronger than you think, Lara." The night passed uneventfully, but Lara barely slept. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. As dawn broke, she stood by the window, staring out at the sprawling gardens. Gabriel joined her, a mug of coffee in his hand. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Victor keeps attacking because he thinks we'll play by the rules, but maybe it's time to stop reacting and start acting." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to confront him," she said, "directly. No lawyers, no PR campaigns, just him and me." Gabriel frowned. "That's dangerous, Lara. Victor doesn't play fair." "I know," she said, "but he needs to see that I'm not afraid of him, that I'm not just some pawn in his game." Gabriel studied her for a long moment before nodding. "If that's what you want, I'll make it happen, but I'm coming with you." 2 days later, Lara found herself standing outside a towering glass building in the heart of the city. Gabriel stood beside her, his presence a reassuring anchor. Together they entered the building, their footsteps echoing in the marble lobby as they approached the receptionist. "We're here to see Victor Andrade," Gabriel said, his voice calm but firm. The receptionist hesitated before nodding and picking up the phone. Moments later, they were escorted to a private office on the top floor. Victor was waiting for them, his expression unreadable as they entered. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, leaning back in his chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Lara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I came to tell you that I'm not afraid of you. You can spread your lies, hire your goons and throw your money around, but it won't stop me from building this school." Victor smirked, his gaze shifting to Gabriel. "She's got spirit. I'll give her that." "This isn't about her," Gabriel said, his tone sharp. "This is about you clinging to a grudge that's long past its expiration date. Whatever you want from me, leave her out of it." Victor's smirk faded, replaced by a cold glare. "You think this is about you, Gabriel? It's not. It's about reminding everyone that actions have consequences. You walked away from your family's legacy, and now you're trying to rewrite history. I won't let you." Lara stepped closer, her voice cutting through the tension. "Your fight with Gabriel has nothing to do with me or this school. If you have a problem with him, take it up with him, but don't you dare use these kids as pawns in your petty game." Victor studied her for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. Finally, he leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "You're braver than I expected, but bravery won't save you." Lara met his gaze, her defiance unwavering. "We'll see about that." As they left the office, Lara felt a strange mix of fear and triumph. The confrontation hadn't solved anything, but it had shifted the balance. She had stood her ground, and for the first time, Victor had seen her as more than a pawn. But as they stepped out into the bustling city streets, Lara couldn't shake the feeling that the next move in Victor's game would be his most dangerous yet. The city's skyline stretched endlessly, lights flickering like a sea of fireflies against the inky night. Lara stood on the balcony of the warehouse-turned-school, the hum of the city below a stark reminder of how far she had come and how much further she had to go. The confrontation with Victor had been a battle of wills, but it hadn't been the end. She knew he was still out there, plotting, waiting for the moment to strike. The school had reopened its doors, and the community had rallied around her in ways she hadn't imagined. Parents volunteered, children poured their creativity into every workshop, and even hesitant donors returned, impressed by her resilience. But Lara couldn't escape the weight of what was still at stake. The fight had taken its toll, on her, on Gabriel, and on everything they had built together. That night, as she closed up the school, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Gabriel. "Come to the cafe near the park. We need to talk." Her stomach twisted. Gabriel's messages were never vague. Something was wrong. The cafe was quiet, its warm glow spilling onto the cobblestone street. Lara spotted Gabriel at a corner table, his posture tense, his expression clouded with something she couldn't quite place. She approached cautiously, her heart pounding. "What's going on?" she asked, sliding into the chair across from him. Gabriel hesitated before speaking, his voice low. "Victor's been digging deeper into my past. And yours. He's looking for something, anything to use against us. And he may have found it." Lara's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Gabriel reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folder. Inside were pages of documents, financial records, photos, emails. Lara's stomach churned as she realized what she was looking at. "He's accusing us of laundering money through the school," Gabriel said grimly. "It's completely fabricated, but the way he's spun it, it looks damning." Lara stared at the papers, her hands trembling. "This could destroy everything," she whispered. "That's what he wants," Gabriel said, "but we're not going to let him win." For the next several days, Lara and Gabriel worked tirelessly to counter Victor's latest attack. They enlisted the help of lawyers, forensic accountants, and even journalists, willing to expose Victor's tactics. But the pressure was mounting, and Lara felt herself unraveling under the weight of it all. On the eve of the school's one-year anniversary, Lara sat alone in the main hall, surrounded by the art and memories that had filled the space with life. She thought about the children, the families, and the community that had placed their trust in her. And she thought about Gabriel, his unwavering support, his quiet strength, and the secrets he had shared with her along the way. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the warehouse. Midnight. Come alone." Every instinct told her it was a trap, but she couldn't ignore it. If there was even a chance to end this once and for all, she had to take it. The warehouse was eerily quiet as Lara entered, the only sound her footsteps echoing against the walls. She scanned the room, her heart pounding. And then, out of the shadows, Victor stepped forward. "Brave of you to come alone," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. "What do you want, Victor?" Lara asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Victor smirked. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, you and Gabriel. But every game has its breaking point. This is yours." Before Lara could respond, the doors burst open, and Gabriel entered, flanked by two men. His presence filled the room, his expression unreadable. "Victor," Gabriel said, his tone cold. "This ends now." Victor chuckled, his gaze shifting between the two of them. "You think you've won? You think you can outmaneuver me?" Gabriel stepped closer, his voice steady. "We already have. Every false accusation, every dirty tactic. It's all been documented, and now the world will see you for who you really are." Victor's smirk faltered, and for the first time, Lara saw something flicker in his eyes, fear. Gabriel's men stepped forward, handing Victor a stack of papers. As he skimmed them, his expression darkened. "This isn't over," Victor hissed, throwing the papers to the ground. "It is," Gabriel said firmly. "Walk away now, or face the consequences." Victor glared at them before turning and storming out of the warehouse. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of the confrontation settling over the room. Lara turned to Gabriel, her voice shaking. "Do you think he'll really stop?" Gabriel sighed. "He doesn't have a choice. We've stripped him of his power. He knows it's over." In the days that followed, the truth about Victor's schemes came to light. The media exposed his attempts to sabotage the school, and public support for Lara and Gabriel soared. Donations poured in, securing the school's future and solidifying its place as a cornerstone of the community. On the night of the school's anniversary celebration, Lara stood on the stage, her heart full as she looked out at the crowd. Children laughed, parents cheered, and Gabriel stood at the back of the room, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet pride. As she addressed the crowd, her voice steady and filled with emotion, she said, "This school was built on the belief that every child deserves a chance to dream, to create, and to thrive, and no amount of money or power can take that away." The room erupted into applause, but Lara's gaze remained fixed on Gabriel. He had been her partner in every sense, and though the battle had tested them, it had also forged a bond neither of them could deny. As the evening wound down, Gabriel approached her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," Lara corrected, a smile tugging at her lips. And in that moment, as the weight of their journey finally lifted, Lara knew that this was only the beginning.